Welcome to the podcast of USASOA, Beyond the Battlefield, where we shine a light on stories of service, sacrifice, and solutions. Today's episode focuses on food insecurity among military families, exploring root causes and policy and legislative solutions. Today's host is John Yori, president of USASOA, and Javier Jimenez, an Air Force veteran and the USASOA Director of Government Affairs. Javier was recently elected to the Harvard University Alumni Board of Directors and received the Distinguished Military Service Award from Harvard.
Hello, everybody. I'm John Yori, president of United Soldiers and Sailors of America, and welcome to our second episode of Beyond the Battlefield. I'm here today with Javier Jimenez. He is the director of our government affairs team, our both military and veteran advocacy team. So I want to welcome Javier and to thank him for taking the time to be with us today. So welcome, Javier.
Thank you, John. Happy to be here.
Great. You know, we're concentrating today, this episode, on food insecurity in the military, and part of our mission is our Food for Troops program. Since 2018, we have, through that program, collected and distributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to thousands of local military family service members and their families in our area. That means Joint Base Andrews. That also means U.S. Army Base Fort Belvoir, Indian Head Naval Warfare Base in Maryland. So basically in what we call the DMV, the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia areas. And also to a lot of families that are living in off-base housing. We have quite a few of those in our surrounding area, the area in which we serve as an organization. So I think it's really important that we dedicate this particular episode to exploring why we have such a problem, why we have historically had a problem with food insecurity within our military. This isn't anything new. This goes back decades. And so, as a part of our organization, we tend to explore it and then advocate for solutions and legislation and policies that will meet the solutions, or provide the solutions rather, to the not only the changing needs of our service members and our veteran communities, but also to existing problems that they face on a day-to-day basis. Now, this in particular, we want to talk about, and I'm going to ask Javier to expand on what we hear from time to time as to the reason from the general public, who, for the most part, do not know anyone that's in the military. There's only 1% of our entire population that serves in the United States military. So the chances of you knowing someone is pretty slim. So without knowing the individual, without knowing the lifestyle of the military, to cast aspersions as to say that they are financially irresponsible or they're not using their money correctly, I think, again, is irresponsible. It's also irrational because people will tend to cast these aspersions without really digging in to the information that is available to them through organizations like ours and through our Food for Troops program. And Javier and our advocacy team has worked diligently on Capitol Hill to provide information and data and information as to why historically and currently there is an issue with food insecurity in our military families. And Javier will talk about also the research paper that took a year with our team, our advocacy team, to develop and uncover a lot of the other reasons as to why our military families experience this kind of a situation. So without any further ado, I want to turn this over to Javier, and maybe he can address those who have that idea that somehow it's the military's fault, somehow it's a military spouse's fault, that they're not using their money correctly or irresponsibly and not providing for their families. So Javier, I'd like you to take that over. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So, unfortunately, we've come to a crossroads in our culture where we tend to believe the first thing that we hear, right? And then for some of us, you and I both serve. I do remember seeing every now and then a young enlisted person with a brand new car. We're like, what are you doing, right? And I get that. I get why we feel and we think that way. But the issue of food insecurity in the military is much more complex than just poor money management. Numerous studies conducted by RAND, Department of Defense, and many other organizations show that many junior enlisted families struggle to meet basic needs. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is low base pay. If you think about an E1 to an E3 with a wife and a spouse and a child, maybe two, many times may have two, making, you know, $2,500, $3,000 a month, it's not doesn't go far, especially not today. Everything costs more, everything's much more expensive. Uh, Cost of living allowance has gone up a lot too, you know, everywhere you go, especially around military bases where housing demand is high, supply is low, cost of things are high. You have a lot of predatory lending. You have a lot of unregulated environments. Then you talk about, many businesses don't want to hire military spouses because of the consistency of them being there and always having to change schedules because husband gets deployed or they get PCS. Childcare, affordability of childcare is very expensive. I mean, if you find childcare for less than $1,500 a month, that's a deal. And that's hard to find. And if you think about somebody who's stationed around the naval installation, where again, there's not a lot of naval childcare, that's also very challenging too. Gaps in eligibility for programs, right? SNAP, for example. That's one that we worked on recently. Families can afford get on SNAP, and now that's even cut even more because they don't qualify because their housing allowance counts as income. We've been working with legislators to try to remove that from being counted as income. But again, that only moves the needle a little bit. That still leaves a lot of families unable to qualify for assistance. There's programs available, but they don't know about it, or they're too proud to ask. And you're also dealing with a lot of young people who don't have a lot of education, who also don't get the education or the services required that they need to be able to live. So you have a lot of contrasting and opposing forces going against each other. You know, you and I remember meeting people that just went from high school to the military that came from very poor backgrounds. I know it's going to sound awful, but I remember somebody telling me one time when I was in active duty saying, I never owned a new pair of shoes until I joined the military. How often do we hear that? Now, we cannot take the position of chastising and demonizing people that come from very disadvantaged backgrounds or don't have a lot of education and say, well, you don't know how to manage your money. First of all, it's not a fact. Second, it's really not the right thing to do. Some of these people have taken the oath to defend our country, to fight, to put their lives on the line, to put their lives at risk. For what? The least we can do is try to at least make sure that they are having a living in a way that is, that is decent, that they have what they need to be able to afford the things that they need. And that's why we constantly advocate for a cost of living adjustment that's based on where they live within the poverty line. Many of our enlisted, the young enlisted, do live in underneath the poverty line, and that's proven. When we look at the data does not lie. Numbers are numbers, science is science. Show that many of those individuals that have a family that are young do live below the poverty line, and that's not acceptable. There has to be more has to be done. We spend $1 trillion in defense every year. I'm sure we can afford to give them at least a decent living, or at least for them being able to afford food. The data shows that even with them not spending money for anything else, they're only able to afford one full meal a day. Where they have to eat cereal for breakfast, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, and maybe dinner so they can go to bed hungry. That's not right.
Yeah, that just kind of, as you were saying, that just kind of brings to mind again our Food for Troops program. And the Food for Troops program, we collect it from various sources. We have an online Amazon store where people anywhere can go. And there's just a grocery list, and people send it to us, and we add it to, the pile of food that we take. Like, for instance, this Saturday, July 12th, we're going to Joint Base Andrews, and we're
Hmm.
having a food distribution there. We have probably a good $10,000 worth of food that's been collected over a period of 2 to 3 months from our food collection drives and other resources and donations. So, people have, it's also a thing, and people have this grand misunderstanding, this misgiving about military life. Again, because they don't know. And it's incumbent, on organizations like IRIS to set the record straight. People think, you always hear this, join the military, you'll see the world, you get your 3 square a day. It's just not true. The seeing the world might be true. You don't get your 3 square a day. Like you were just saying, you're probably eating the same thing you did if you had, breakfast in the morning. And the stories that we hear, and again, because of military resiliency, they're not going to complain. That's not the way you do things when you're in the military. So that's also an issue because they do not have a voice. And our organization, through what you're doing, Javier, and our advocacy team, is giving them that voice, to speak out for them. But we do hear the stories. They will talk to us when they come and take the food that we set up to distribute. And so many times, the husband or the wife is deployed and the other spouse is home with the kids. And so if it's a wife or a husband coming to get the food, they'll stand in line for a good hour while we are setting up for the food distribution. You do not stand there in line for an hour or so waiting for food if you got your toddlers running around acting crazy. You just don't do it. So that just shows you, how important this is. And it's not like they're stocking their pantries, adding to the pantry. This is their pantry. This is actually what they're using to have dinner that night.
And let me point out another fact, John. This is very indicative of the problem. So the majority of pantries or food banks in the United States, you know where they're centered?
Mm-hmm.
Around military installations.
You're right. Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
gonna put a food bank where I live.
Right.
They're gonna either they go to very impoverished areas or military installations. That is an indication of how big of a problem this is, right? And let's not lose the sight of the fact that, I would love. I have not had anyone tell me specifically that what you just commented on, because I want to tell them, okay, well then what's the issue, right? What is the real issue? The issue is 2 things: military readiness and national security.
Yes.
That's what's at stake here. If we're not meeting recruitment goals, if we're not having people stay in the military, if
retention,
they go to work retention, recruitment, that impacts national security.
Absolutely.
That impacts military readiness. If you're too worried about your family eating,
right,
or that you can't wait till you get deployed so you can get that extra per diem so your family can buy food, that is the wrong mentality and the wrong approach to take.
Yeah.
So let's not lose sight of that. So sometimes when I hear comments like that, internally it infuriates me. Of course, I try not to show it, because it's like, what are we doing here? It's almost like you're cutting off your nose.
And it's part of this new adventure with this administration, at DOD, the Department of Defense, of this idea of warrior ethos. Okay, there should be a lot behind something like that. If you're going to make that kind of a grand statement, then you need to dig into what does it take to build a true warrior ethos. And that means taking care of our military families, that when they show up to these food distributions, especially the children, these people are not living large. They are using hand-me-downs. I had one child out of many, but you can see the clothes they're wearing. One little boy, he had to be about 4 years old. He had one shoe that was different from the other. And this is a young family, mom probably 24, 25, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And we start talking. She goes, yeah, she said he wore out one shoe on the one pair, one on the other. So I put them together because we just can't afford $25 or whatever it is right now. My husband's deployed. We're having problems. She kind of went into it. We're
Oh,
having
yeah.
problems because of the finances. We just don't have enough. Even when we go to the commissary, the prices are rising there as well. We have a limited amount of funds. Everything costs more because she has a baby in arms. So what are they supposed to do? Not have children?
Yeah.
Not have children?
Hey,
And
yeah.
on that layer of sacrificing everything, including your life, if need be, you're supposed to say, well, now struggle for food on top of it. Let this be a part of that concept of warrior ethos. Why don't we really do so? Instead of making these grand statements, why don't we get in there and do the work that needs to be done to support our families and not just make these grandiose statements that sounds good, that's a good soundbite. But if you're really serious about this, work with organizations like ours that actually goes out there, that actually tries to provide the solution to the problems and challenges they face. We don't
Yeah.
sit in our offices. Yeah, we do. We're sitting now. But for the most part, we are out. We are out doing things. It's grassroots, boots on the ground. We want to find out what's going on and then provide that. And then we galvanize other organizations who may or may not want to join us because a lot of our work is done on weekends
Yeah.
out there. We're doing food distributions. We're taking care of homeless veterans, providing them with food. That's a whole nother episode we'll be doing soon. So it takes a commitment, duty, and a responsibility on every civilian's part to actually, dismay and dismantle those attitudes that somehow have got lodged in their mind, that the military is well taken care of. And again, this isn't an indictment on what's going on now currently this administration, this goes back many, many, many
Hey,
administrations. My cousin Natalie and Gary served in the Gary, who served, he was one of the Nazi hunters during the Nuremberg trials. He was in World War II, lieutenant, and uh, and Natalie just started talking to me. She said we had the same problem. We're talking about 1942, 43, 44, 45 that we experienced the same type of a situation. They weren't giving us enough money to meet the rising costs or the current costs, much less the rising costs. And we struggled and struggled, and they had to use food banks. Like you
yeah.
said, food banks. Now, around Fort Hood, there's churches, many churches have food banks, and they'll tell you, the pastors and the church leaders will tell you who are your customers, basically. And they will tell you inevitably the majority of the people that utilize the food banks come in uniform, going
Yeah,
to,
I never saw more people in need than I did when I was in active duty.
yeah,
I grew up in South Texas. There are a lot of poor people, but they never went without. I
right.
never saw that, experience any of that until I joined active duty. And I have a child. My oldest daughter's in the Navy. Like, she's single. Like for me, I was single when I was in active duty, so I lived in the dorm. But yeah, if you're single, live in the dorm, 3 squares a day, of course. But that's not the reality of things. And we have not changed the mentality and the pay structure. The pay structure that the military currently has, it's an antiquated system. It's based on antiquated rules and laws and way and societal um, norms. And all they do every year is just basically up it, up it, up it, just increase it. But that's not. We got to think of it, and I know I'm straying here a little bit, but we got to think of a different approach, a different system of how we compensate military. You know how much money they spend today to try to recruit and retain people? They're paying bonuses, they're paying school loans, they're paying all these, they're spending a lot of money trying to increase recruitment when they should be focusing maybe on maybe giving them a better living standard, right?
Right.
I often hear people say, well, if I go work at Home Depot, I can make $15, $16 an hour. I don't have to worry about killing myself or putting my life on the line. I make the same amount of money.
Yeah.
Well, that's really the reality of things.
Yeah. As you're talking, it just kind of reminds me also of the spouse that's left at home or at home taking care of the children. Do you go out and try to get a job for, hopefully $12 to 15 an hour at this point?
Yeah.
Or, and what good does that do if you're paying for childcare? Because it's going to be much more than the $12 to
Absolutely.
$15 an hour you're going to make minus
Yeah.
your taxes. So, that's another situation. So they're, just kind of grappling with the same, sort of the same situation as their civilian counterparts, but the civilian counterparts have a lot more opportunities to get out there and work in the civilian world because they're not constantly moving around. CPS season, I'm off. I'm going here. I'm going to another state. How do you really nail down a good job? That might be $20, $25 an hour when at any point in time, or that at a point in time, you're moving on. So employers see that once they hear that that's a military spouse. Well, probably not want to do that. I'll train you. You'll get in here. You'll do a great job. But then, in a certain amount of time, you're gone and I'm stuck again. So I'm looking for somebody that's going to be just a little bit more permanent than what you would be. So again, just going back to the idea that we have to discourage folks from, using these ideas that somehow creep into their heads that, once you join the military, everything is great, life is perfect and it can be anything but there are a lot of good people that are, just struggling quietly. And I just really thank you, Javier, and the team for doing everything you're doing, especially with the research paper that was just completed from like plus a year. Took about a year or so to go ahead and do all the data mining for that. And we did present it to several members of Congress on Capitol Hill, Senator Lisa Murkowski, and also Senator Tammy Duckworth, who's been a very strong and vocal advocate for military hunger prevention act, which there are so many pieces of legislation floating around
Yeah.
that but again, if you're going to be serious about this, it's going to take money. It's not just saying, one administration comes in, I'm giving them, a 2% increase or a 4 or 5% increase. That really doesn't do much at all when, the cost of living goes up 12% or whatever it might be. You're still not meeting, nothing plus nothing is still, kind of nothing. So, we should be treating them, it's incumbent on us to treat them the
Yeah.
way that they deserve to be treated because there's not many, as you can imagine, 1% of the population. That's it. That's all we have.
We have to be careful. I mean, John, let's be honest here. I mean, one of the reasons we have our way of life and we enjoy the benefits that we have is because of our power in the military. I mean, let's be honest, that it
Yeah.
is what it is, right? That's why. And I just read a report that even though that's kind of like being shoved under the radar, there's an exodus of people separating from the military. And a lot of them are officers that are ending their contracts,
Yeah.
right? I just spoke to somebody who went to an academy, is the daughter of a friend, and her husband are both officers in the military. And because of what's taking place, they're like, they don't want to serve. They're like, we're going to separate. And they're seeing a lot of that too. So we just have to be very careful about what we're doing here.
Yeah.
We're the US, we're the largest, most powerful nation in the world. And for us to be having this type of issue is indicative of something much larger. If we're not able to at least feed our military, then we have bigger problems that we need to
Yeah,
resolve.
Javier, it goes to what you were just saying too, that, through our other programs that we provide to both military and veteran communities, we have a lot of volunteers. And being in DC, we have the opportunity to get, to have volunteers who are active duty, especially down at Marine Base, Washington. We've had a lot of the younger generation Marines,
Mhm.
Lance corporals and some corporals join us,
Mhm.
and some in particular have logged hundreds of hours, over a 2, 3 year period that they've been here in DC, in the DC area. And I'll never forget one of them in particular who's from Texas and another from Arizona. They go home on leave and their buddies ask them, and here you're talking guys that are 20, 21 years old. They go back home and their buddies are like, hey, how's the military? How's the Marine Corps? How's it going for you? And he said, look, this is the deal, and so they get that, kind of negative response from the person, sort of not say negative, but in a sense, but it is. It's like, I don't know if you really, maybe I should, if I'd have known about this, I probably wouldn't have joined, that sort of thing. So they're not getting that initial hit that, yeah, this is great for you, which it is. I mean, people should look at the military, as a viable career. There's so many benefits to it. So we don't want to make this also negative on the military, but we're trying to single out, what the situations are, the most dire situations and challenges they face because they have to be addressed. Again, because of military resiliency, they're not going to speak out. We have to be that voice. So we always want to make sure they're treated the best they can. And then we had another Marine that was 19, got married and had a little baby. And so that particular Marine was not obviously making enough money to really meet the needs of that child, of that infant. Diapers, if anybody knows how much diapers cost, baby wipes, powders, baby food, everything that goes into it is going to say, yeah, I understand what you're talking about. Yeah. So in order for them to get by, the single Marines on the base or at the there decided that they would give up half of their paycheck every month to the Marine that had a baby, so that that couple could have enough money to buy for Pampers and buy food and everything else. So when you hear about stories like that, you're not going to hear about it on the news. You're not going to hear about it anywhere because, unless your organization and your people are there on the ground, listening, not only helping, but also listening, that's when you're going to hear the stories about how the situation really is for our military families. Yeah. So we have to dig deep, and not be so superfluous about, hey, everything's great in the military. While it is, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of benefits to serving our nation in the military in uniform. We also have to be strong enough to address the issues and challenges that are serious to them. And I would venture to say food insecurity is at the top of that list.
Absolutely.
100%. So like you were saying, we do have money for a lot of things. It's just a matter of allocating the resources that we do have, which we do, properly to ensure that they have, at least have enough good, healthy food, that they can put shoes on their kids' feet, that they can have the proper clothing, that the proper nutritious food, and they're not eating breakfast for dinner, that sort of thing. And organizations like ours will no longer be needed because we've resolved our own problems the way that the American people, I'm sure, demand that they should be treated. So With that, Javier, I'll let you have the final word, and we'll talk about our next episode next week.
Okay, great. Well, so I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, John. I've had I get a lot of pleasure and also a sense of worth working with your organization and being able to make a difference to our military. It's something I'm passionate about. It's been in my blood my whole life. Serving, working for an ad agency, working on the Army account, working at USA now, serving the military. So it's part of my DNA, and I'm pleased to be here. Like I said, we'll continue the effort. We'll continue the fight.
Great.
Thank you, John.
So I want to thank everybody for listening and watching the second episode of Beyond the Battlefield as we address the issues and challenges facing our military and our veteran communities. So the episode next week will be focused on hunger among our elderly veterans and also veteran homelessness and displacement. So if anyone is interested in joining our organization, we are in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia area right now. We have numerous programs and services. If you're interested in volunteering or supporting our organization, please visit our website. It's USASOA.org. And with that, I'd like to sign off. And as you see my shirt, go Red Sox. And so thanks everyone again, and we will see you next week. Have a good evening.
Thank you for joining us every Thursday for Beyond the Battlefield. We hope today's conversation sparked reflection and renewed gratitude. Don't miss next Thursday's episode. More stories, more impact, always in honor of those who serve.